Welcome to Sharpe Insights, Conversations with your Plan Giving Experts, a podcast for development professionals. Whether you're new to the field or looking to enhance your existing program, we will provide practical tips, expert advice, and real-world stories to deepen your understanding of plan giving. If you're committed to securing long-term support for your nonprofit, you've come to the right place.
Welcome to Sharpe Insights. I'm your host, Grant Miller. One of the most valuable skills in gift planning isn't understanding tax law or mastering the intricacies of various gift vehicles. It's knowing how to listen and how to listen well. Today's guest is Alex Brovey, author of the Zen and the Art of Fundraising series, who teaches that the best fundraisers are students of human nature. They learn to recognize the subtle cues donors give, ask thoughtful questions, and remain fully present in every conversation. Alex is Assistant Vice President of Gift Planning at the Northwell Foundation. An attorney, author, and nationally recognized speaker, Alex has more than 25 years' experience in charitable gift planning. She's known for her unique approach to fundraising that blends mindfulness, relationship building, and what she calls black belt gift planning. Today, Alex joins us to discuss listening, donor relationships, and the human side of philanthropy. Alex, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you on today.
Grant, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, let's start kind of broadly. So for listeners who may not be familiar with your work, can you just share a bit about your background and what inspired you to write the Zen and the Art of Fundraising series?
Sure. So when I was little, I had a dream one day that I would write a book. And I feel like many people have that dream, some when they're younger, some when they're older. And I've now met a bunch of people around the country, including some of my donors who have written a book. So I'm proud to say I can check that item off of my childhood bucket list. But I went to law school. I loved estate planning. I loved helping people plan, organize, think about things, think about what's important to them. And I was working for a law firm in Pennsylvania, and Penn State was one of our clients. And I got to know the people and the activities in this Office of Plan Giving and Endowments at Penn State. And I thought, wow, that would seem like a great place to work. It is my undergraduate alma mater. And so when they had a job posting for a plan giving officer, I applied. And I've never really looked back. That was in August of 1999. And I've been a gift planner ever since. And this idea about Zen and the art of fundraising, it wouldn't seem that fundraising is a very Zen activity, but you can find Zen moments in anything you do, including fundraising. And I just decided to explore those in a couple of books.
Well, first off, congratulations for achieving a childhood dream of publishing a book. There are many of us who have that same goal. And so I think we all look forward to getting over the hump there. So congratulations to you for getting there. So I'm just curious about using this Eastern approach and the concept of Zen in the context of plan giving and fundraising. And what does it mean to you in the context of donor relationships?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Zen. Zen might be one of those overused words. Sometimes I think we hear it in many different contexts. And I decided to look it up just to see what a dictionary might say Zen means, and then I'll describe what I think it means in the fundraising context. So Merriam-Webster, a well-known dictionary, defines Zen as a state of calm attentiveness in which one's actions are guided by intuition rather than by conscious effort. And so I paused with that for a few moments when I looked that up. And so Zen in fundraising is finding those moments. And those moments will usually, but not always, happen when fundraisers are with donors, although they do happen at other times. And to me, what it means in the fundraising world is letting things develop, trying not to control every moment or every meeting, even though we usually have to have an agenda and it's important to have goals, just to sometimes let things happen. And I call that being in the moment. So that's my definition as it applies to the fundraising world.
And in your book, you talk about 8 pillars of fundraising success. And the first one there is being in the moment. What are the other 7 pillars? And I know that you probably go really in depth into this in the book. We don't have to do that here. But what are the other pillars? And can you just describe briefly how they apply to plan giving and donor relationships?
Sure. I'll just do a recap. So in the first book, I shared 8 pillars. And as you said, the first one is being in the moment. The second one, number two, is listening. And we can spend a little more time hovering on that one. Other ones include compassion, curiosity, humility, patience, a sense of humor, and being a mentor. So those were the ones I really focused on and went in depth. I found a quote for each and every one of those, not necessarily from a Buddhist monk, although we do have some Buddhist people who I've quoted in there. And then I'd share a donor story for each of those and try to show how these, what I call pillars or traits of successful fundraisers, really matter in the day-to-day world.
So you have being in the moment, listening, compassion, curiosity, humility, patience, humor, and mentorship. Is that right?
Yes.
Can we talk just a little bit about, say, how does compassion apply, curiosity, and just kind of go through these just a little bit,
Sure.
if you're comfortable doing that?
Sure. So compassion is understanding things from the donor's frame of mind. So in the fundraising world, we often have donors that come from one end or the other. Either they're excited and they want to celebrate something and give back in that way, or perhaps something didn't go quite right and they want to remedy a situation. And so compassion is trying to understand from their point of view, what's their reason for wanting to make a gift. And this is part of where, although the fundraiser would like to think that they're in charge of the meeting and the timing and everything else, we kind of have to let that go and be in the moment and let our donors explore that a little bit. In the healthcare field, it's a little easier to kind of let that compassion flow to the top because often we hear very touching stories related to healthcare. But those moments, I would imagine, come up in all types of organizations where we're here to help people. That's our organization's mission. Many of the missions are to help in some way, whether it's health or education or pets or feeding people or religious provisions. Whatever it is, our missions are usually to help people. And so compassion can be found in anything, and you need to find it in yourself in order to be, I believe, an effective fundraiser. And then you mentioned curiosity. So I think of all the pillars, curiosity is kind of the fun one. Curiosity is Tigger bouncing up and down on his tail and always looking around the next corner to see what's going on. Another way to look at it is, are you ever satisfied with the amount of information you know about your donors? I mean, as much information as you think you know, they're always holding something back, intentionally or not. So you can meet for years with donors and still find out something new. And so that's the importance of the pillar of curiosity, for example.
Excellent. Yeah, we always talk about how the technical aspects of fundraising are important to communicate with donors, right? But they're a small part of it. We're not selling a car. Another one you mentioned is humor. And I was really intrigued with the fact that you included humor as one of these pillars. And as a person who I really appreciate humor and I try to apply it whenever I can. I don't know how funny I actually am, but I think I'm pretty funny. My wife would beg to differ and my son would definitely beg to differ. But I'm interested in the pillar of humor. Can you talk a little bit about why that and why you chose that as a pillar?
Sure. They say laughter is good for the soul. And I think if you can find moments where you can embrace fun and laughter, and that's where the sense of humor comes in with your donors, you're going to build positive experiences with them, right? And they're going to help you float at the times when maybe something goes awry. As we all know in the fundraising world, things go swellingly along until they don't, until COVID hits or something happens with your donor related to your organization or a similar organization. And so a sense of humor is really important. That also includes being able to laugh at yourself and your own errors. And I share a story. I don't remember which book this is in. I share a story. I went to visit an 80-year-old couple in their assisted living facility, and we were walking together from their apartment into the shared space to enjoy a meal, and I tripped on the way. And so this 80-year-old couple, both of them had to take my arms either side and walk me down into the room after I tripped. And the funny thing is, if you were looking at this from any perspective, you would assume that the 30-year-old in the middle was helping maybe her grandparents get to the eating room. And the truth of the matter was, I was the one who tripped and they were helping me. You just have to be able to laugh at these situations when they happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's an excellent tool for releasing tension, I think. And a lot of these conversations, I think, can be fraught with, nerves and tension and those sorts of things. And so in your second book, you identify an additional 8 pillars of fundraising success. Did you write the books with all 3 in mind, or did you write one and think, oh, I need to expand on this? Was that your process?
It was. When I wrote the book, I thought, I know I'm missing important things that are keys to success of being a fundraiser, but I thought I would focus on the 8. As I was finishing that book, I thought of a couple more, and it turned out it was 8 more. And I kind of analogized to the fact that every once in a while, the FDA decides that they need to change the percent of protein that we need in our diet or something else, or they add something and say you need this mineral. So I kind of thought, well, there's no reason I can't have 8 more. My publisher and I joked, and the question was, how many eights am I going to have? How many books are we going to have? In the third book, I actually take the 16 pillars and apply them to actual fundraising situations. But in each of the first 2 books, I focus on each of those pillars by themselves to make sure that we can reflect on them a little bit, figure out how each one can make us a more successful fundraiser.
And in the second book, the 8 pillars are passion, honesty, courage, resilience, acceptance, gratitude, positivity, and intuition, correct?
Yes.
And, I have an idea of those other ones, but I'm curious about intuition. Can you talk about intuition? Because I do believe that, or as far as I understand it, Zen and this idea of intuition kind of go hand in hand. So can you talk a little bit about the concept of intuition and how that is helpful and applicable to fundraising or donor relationships?
Sure. For those who are familiar with the NCIS series, Gibbs would often say in the end, what he did is he went with his gut. That's what he would say, go with your gut. Those of us who use GPS know sometimes it's insisting that you make a right-hand turn and your gut is telling you that the building you need or the place you need is on your left. And so sometimes you just have to go with your gut. And I think intuition is a lot like that. It's not something where you can really explain logically why you had this sudden urge to call a donor, for example, or why when you went to talk to a donor about X, you realized that maybe you really should talk to a donor about Y. It's something unwritten. It's something that your brain just simply understands and you just kind of go with it and let that moment happen. And that was in that Merriam-Webster definition, the idea of intuition. And I hadn't actually looked up that definition until after I wrote some of these chapters, including the one on intuition. But that's why I think intuition is so important. In the end, you want to go with your gut. Your gut kind of knows what's right and wrong. And in the end, you want to do the right thing as a fundraiser for your mission and for your donors.
Yes. And I think intuition circles back to the second pillar, which is listening. And listening is a theme that you've discussed extensively. And a lot of that's just listening for sometimes things that you can't hear explicitly. That would be cues and clues that the donor is giving, or sometimes things that aren't always said explicitly, but live under the surface of the conversation or the words that we're using. What are some of these cues and clues that people who are, having to apply these things, and maybe it's a learning curve for them or something that they don't do naturally, because I think a lot of people are naturally intuitive. Some people are better listeners than others and that sort of thing. So what are some of the cues and clues, the things that might be below the surface that fundraisers might look for, and why is that so important?
So you asked the question in a very interesting way. I always think about how can you really listen for something that's not being said, right?
Yeah.
It sounds kind of contrary to logic, but most donors and most of us, when we say something, we don't say all the reasons behind it, or we might answer it, but we answer it incompletely. We don't do this to be deceitful. It's just we don't have the time and energy and space to share every single thing. So sometimes your questions will require a yes or no answer from someone. And if you're sitting with a donor and you want to get to know about them, you want to try to ask questions other than the ones that have the answers yes or no, like why did you give, or how did this make you feel? When you ask why and how, they really aren't yes or no answers. But to get to your point about cues and clues and listening for them, when you sit with the donor, you might say, well, what are goals in your life, or what are things that worry you if you're thinking about making a gift? Like, what are the other factors? And they might say, well, I'm worried about having income in my retirement, or I'm worried about what to do with my vacation property, or I'm worried about my retirement, or I'm worried because I'm at the age now where my parents passed away. And they share these things, and these things require further exploration. And the cues and clues part comes from just doing this, just being in that position where you're listening to donors over time. For example, as a gift planner, I'm always listening for a cue or clue about whether someone might need an income stream during their lifetime, because there is a gift. There are several gift options where they can make a gift to a charity and get an income stream back. So I'm listening for those things. So if having enough money in retirement comes up, that is a cue or clue to me that I might want to say, did you know that there is a way you can make a gift to charity and get an income stream back? And the benefit to you is that you get that income stream, and that might enable you to be able to make a gift you never thought you could make and have a future impact. Would you like to know more about that? Now, you notice in the end, I asked the yes or no question. Would you like to know more about that? I'm hoping their answer is yes. So I'm reading what they're saying and I'm translating it and trying to think about charitable solutions if they're interested in making a gift that can help them solve problems. So those are examples of some of the things that I listen for.
Right. So a donor might come to a meeting and say, I want to leave a bequest, but I'm concerned about this, that, and this and that. And it's our job as fundraisers and listeners to hear more about the donor situation and find the gift planning vehicle that's right for them and not exactly what we maybe came into the meeting trying to establish.
That's right. And that's why you have your goals when you come into a meeting. You have an idea. You might have even brought paperwork with you to describe this. I brought paperwork to a meeting one time because someone had said something about, worrying about their money during retirement, and figured maybe they did want to talk about some of these gifts, right? And when I mentioned a gift to me, and they said, actually, I don't need any income. I have enough income. So it's questioning and talking about it. And sometimes you put aside whatever papers you brought and you just listen and let the conversation go as it's going to go. And that goes back to that intuition and being in the moment, both of those things.
I love it. So you can go in with an agenda, but allow it to be subject to change.
Absolutely. The agenda that you have is based on your needs and your goals. And maybe you need to look at the agenda that your donor or prospect who's sitting across from you had when they agreed to meet with you. And you might have stated what your agenda was, but they might still have their own agenda. And so you want to make sure that you cover that agenda, because of the two, that's the more important agenda, is the donor's agenda. Until you deal with their agenda, they aren't going to pay attention to yours. And that's a hard lesson, because sometimes you have a goal or you plan to solicit someone and the conversation can go off the rails because of something completely outside of control. It happens.
One of your unique approaches to fundraising blends mindfulness, relationship building, and what you call black belt gift planning. And I was just hoping that you could talk a little bit more about this concept of black belt gift planning. What inspired it? Where did it come from? And how does it apply to fundraising?
Sure. And that actually predated my Zen series. So more than 10 years ago, I worked very hard and I was fortunate to earn my initial black belt in Shotokan karate. And it took over a decade to get to that point. And in the class after I received my black belt, so my sensei had presented it to me, he came up to me and he said, Alex, now you're ready to begin learning. And I looked at him and I said, excuse me, do not see the black belt or recall, giving it to me. But his point was, it's like graduating from high school, right? You get your diploma and you feel this sense of achievement, but what does the diploma mean? Now you're ready to go out in the real world and actually try to live in the real world, right? So after I earned this karate belt, I thought about it and thought about the 10 belts that I had earned to get to that point and thought, I see his point. Each learning lesson along the way, or each time you learn something or achieve something new, learn about a new technique or meet with a different set of donors or even change jobs and do something different, is like a different belt that you earn toward your ultimate black belt. And you're never really done learning. That's something I learned from that. So I just put together little things and called it a belt and went through the belts as you progress through your career as a gift planner and a fundraiser, just to try to lead up to the fact that even when you're a master, you still have things to learn. None of us have done everything. We haven't worked at all types of charities. We haven't met every single donor that there is or every situation that can come up. And we all have things to learn. And that was the essence of the black belt gift planning presentation.
Excellent. So we have the 16 pillars and the black belt gift planning. If a fundraiser walked into a meeting with you or a donor meeting and they were taking the 16 pillars into account, a lot of times we kind of lack self-awareness around the gaps in our understanding, or because, we don't know what we don't know. And my wife will say like, oh, you grind your teeth all the time or something like that. I have no idea that I'm doing that or anything like that. Do you have any advice for us and what we should focus on first, and maybe how we could fill these gaps in our self-awareness of issues that we need to work on a little bit more? Or
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. First of all, donors sometimes give you feedback directly or indirectly. Take that very seriously, because they're your ultimate goal. If you're not working with donors, then you're not raising money. So if they ever say anything to you that can help you improve, if they ever have a suggestion or they ever share anything with you, listen very carefully to what they say. Your colleagues too. We never want to criticize anyone, but we always do want suggestions. There are organizations and some charities that do the 360 reviews, where they actually have the people that report to you review you. And so that's something that you can learn from as well. And The other way I kind of self-reflect is in two ways, and everyone can do this. I take a letter that I wrote a couple of years ago and I pull it out and dust it off and turn around and sit in the chair opposite of the chair where I normally sit. In other words, the donor chair or the guest chair. And I read the letter and I read it as if I'm the recipient. And it's interesting how when you read it with a different point of view in mind, you get different things from it. And I can almost always go back with a letter that I thought was the greatest letter that I wrote, the best that I could write at that time. And I can always make it better. I can always make it better. And the second thing that I do to test myself is, and this is where humility maybe comes into play a little bit. When you think you're at the peak and you tend to think, I'm very good at what I do and I know maybe not everything, but I know a lot and I don't know how much better at this that I can get. All I do is I say to you, what did you think about yourself 5 or 10 years ago? Where'd you think you were in your arc of your career or your life? And then let me ask you this, where do you think you'd be if you continued on this arc for the next 5 to 10 years? Do you think you'd be more effective 5 to 10 years from now than you are now? And the answer almost inevitably has to be yes. And so that can kind of put where you are in perspective and remind you that it's a continuous journey of learning.
So we want to be on the journey, be fluid and be open and always be willing to admit that we aren't perfect and don't know everything about everything and can always have something to add to our experience, knowledge, the tool bag, however you want to use that metaphor. So there's a story in your book about being with donors on 9/11 and some other stories in your book. Can you talk a little bit about that story, or did you want to talk about one of your favorite stories from the book or one that you found to be the most inspiring?
Maybe I can try to tackle both. So I was visiting donors on 9/11. When I was leaving my hotel room, I heard that something had happened in New York City, but I had to turn the TV off and go to my first meeting. And I was traveling around the Washington, D.C. Beltway, which is the road that goes around Washington into Virginia and Maryland, for those who aren't familiar. And I had meetings that day, and I couldn't seem to get anyone on the phone. So I just kept going to all of my meetings. And my first meeting of the morning, which I want to talk about, was with the couple. They were in their 70s or 80s. And by that time, I had heard what had happened, which was that a plane had crashed into a building in New York City. And I went up and knocked on their door. And usually there's a period of time where you introduce yourself to someone, you spend a little time on the enjoyable small talk and, how is the travel and how are you this morning and all of that. And I basically knocked on the door and said hello. And I said, this is going to sound very unconventional, but would you be willing to turn the television on? I think we need to watch the television right now. And they said, what channel? And I said, I think probably any channel right now. And so we turned the TV on and they had one of those 3-seater sofas. And I sat down in the middle of the two of them. They each had their seats on the end. And the three of us sat there and we watched the towers fall. And that was our meeting. And I had an agenda for that meeting. I was soliciting them for a 6-figure gift and coming from a distance away to do it. And we had to make plans to be there that morning. And there were really no words at that moment as the three of us sat there on that sofa in Maryland, not far from DC, where again, we would have something else tragic go on a little bit later in the morning. And, we've all heard that phrase, read the room, can you read the room? In this case, the room was silent. And my paperwork that I brought was not at all lighting a fire under me at the moment. We just kind of sat there and we didn't say too much to each other. And, and I said, when this was done, they said, is it okay if we turn the TV off now? And I said, yes. I said, thank you for being willing to turn it on. I said, I just felt that was a moment that maybe we couldn't really in good conscience miss. I said, is there anything you want to talk about now? And we all mutually agreed that it wasn't the time to continue the gift conversation at that moment. And the gift happened at some later point in time, but that was called reading the room. So that was kind of a sad moment. That's a little bit of intuition. And it's very much being in the moment, right? On the other hand is kind of the humorous moments, the resilience moments. Resilience is a wonderful thing. And it is a pillar and it is something that came out of 9/11, right? How resilient that we were. But resilience is what you rely on when you're in that oh crap situation and you don't know what else to do. And so when things happen to you, not necessarily what I just described, but things happen to you that don't go your way, I always say it's important to ask yourself 3 questions. And the first question is there anything funny about this situation at all? And sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. The second question you ask yourself is, am I going to let this ruin my day? Now, that's a choice, right? It's either funny or not in your opinion, but am I going to let this ruin my day? So this is what resilient people will go through in their thought process. And number 3, if you can't get over number 1 and 2, is usually the clincher and can usually make me smile. And it's, would this be funny if this were happening to someone else? Whatever the situation happens to be. So I made plans to meet with someone and I had their phone number, but I wasn't able to get them. And I pulled up to the diner one morning at 9 o'clock and there was a sign in the diner and no cars in the parking lot and it said it was closed. And I tried to reach the person and I couldn't. And I'm sitting there thinking, now what? So is there anything funny about this? I didn't think it was too funny at the time. Am I going to let this ruin my day? Well, it was 9 o'clock in the morning and I thought this is a bad start to the day. But then I got to number 3. Would this be funny if this were happening to anyone else? And I said, this story is probably going to have a funny ending later. And when I tell this story to my colleagues, they're all going to be laughing about it, right? Around the water cooler. And it turns out that the person pulled up in the car, rolled down her window and kind of laughed at me and said, well, I guess we have to make other plans and go somewhere else. So the meeting went on. But, these are the things that can happen that can throw a temporary stop sign up. And resilience is the pillar that gets you through these things. And asking those 3 questions, I ask myself those 3 questions when things happen and try to get to the sense of humor and try to get over it. What it does is helps you be in the moment and then get past the moment. That's what resilience does.
I love that resilience. I love your focus on humor. Just thinking back through all the things I've learned in the podcasts that we've done, there hasn't been a huge focus on humor. And I really appreciate that, the exploration of that. And I love not just in fundraising, but in life, I always try to think when I'm tired and just got off work and my kid's like, hey, do you want to go throw the baseball? And I really don't want to. I always think like, what would my future self want in this moment? Am I going to 10 years from now be like, well, I was tired? Or am I going to be like, hey, I'm glad I went and threw the baseball with my kid? And I love this idea of in the future, would my future self think this was funny, even though my present self doesn't think this is funny at all and thinks it's annoying and it's a big problem. But I think that's not just in gift planning, but in life. That's a really strong approach to have. So thanks for exploring that with us. I think that's awesome. Okay, so moving forward, you wrote one, and then you, as we talked about earlier, we're continuing to learn. We don't really reach a ceiling. Are there any more pillars in the works? Are there any other things that if you were talking to someone that you would add onto your books, or any realizations, revelations, anything since you've published the books?
I've thought about that, and I'm not ready to publish a book 4, but I've thought about what all of these lead up to because I started a fiction series for young adults and thinking about these pillars and putting them in situations, but relating it to kids in their life. And what all these pillars show, in a way, what all of them lead to is respect. And respect is probably something that's in short supply these days when you listen to the news and read the papers and talk to people. And if you exhibit all of these pillars, they're all signs of respect. Listening is probably a number 1 sign of respect. And in the fundraising world, it's really important because some of your donors have money. They have everything. They can buy anything they want. But you can't always buy someone who's going to pay attention to you, listen to you, and really hear what you're saying, and then help you do something with it. And that's something very unique and treasured that we fundraisers can do for people, is give them our time, our attention, and ultimately our respect. And I think a lot of that flows from all of the other pillars. I think a lot of them show signs of self-respect and a need to respect yourself to go out and really be able to respect other people. And so I think respect is probably what these all kind of lead to, sort of the silent pillar all along.
Perfect. Because my next question was, and my wrap-up question was, if there was one takeaway you wanted listeners to take away today from the conversation, would it be that all of these things just kind of lead to this overarching idea of respect?
Yeah, I think so. And the idea that you had worded so eloquently is that all of these together make you who you are, and you're always a work in progress, right? So you can always look back and say, wow, I'm much improved since there. And then, like I said, if you want to ground yourself, you always look forward and say, I think I can do better no matter how much good that I've done. And so that's what all of these pillars do, is they help you become a more effective fundraiser, but maybe even more importantly, they're useful throughout your life in all facets. They help you be a better parent, a better colleague, a better supervisor, a better board member, a better person in life when you follow these pillars and apply them to all aspects other than fundraising. And I do think that it all probably does lead to that silent pillar of respect. Yeah.
I love that. And that's one of the things that I admire so much about these books and your work, is that they don't just apply to fundraising. They apply to one's being in the world and being a human being. And I think that's what all good books do, no matter what they're about. They remind us what it means to be human, and they remind us to walk through the world in certain ways, and that these things don't just apply to fundraising. They apply to throwing the ball in the yard with your kid or whatever it might be. So thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Sharpe Insights, sharing your experience and your expertise. If you'd like to learn more about Alex's books, blogs, or speaking topics, you can visit alexandrabrovey.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, share it with a colleague, and join us next time for another conversation about the ideas, people, and strategies shaping the future of charitable gift planning. And again, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Grant.
And to all our listeners, thank you for being a part of the conversation. Until next time, I'm Grant Miller. Thanks for listening. We hope today's discussion gave you practical takeaways to grow your plan giving program. To submit questions and topics for future episodes, go to sharpegroup.org or listen to us on your favorite podcast app. If you found this podcast insightful, be sure to like, review, and subscribe. Until then, stay sharp.